Hello, Exiles. Somehow we're back here again. I thought, well, if they're gonna do another update right away, it'll probably be a small one, but it was not. It's 4 new Ascendancies. Let's get right into it, because again, these videos I feel are already too long as it is, and I'm really trying to get them broken down. We have the Whisper for the Ranger, which kind of continuing the theme of having very eclectic choices going forward on what the Ranger gets. This was like kind of a wand, almost kind of spellcast, well, a little bit spellcaster oriented. This one is mana oriented, and it's honestly I'm pretty impressed with this one. I love some of the thematics and the text here. We'll get to that in a moment because we're going to be starting with that. We have Herald for Witch, Auto Bombers Rejoice. We have Paladin for Duelist. Not as cool as it sounds, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think I'm actually the most disappointed in this one so far. Hopefully someone will clap me in the comments for being an idiot who's got a smooth brain, because I just don't really see it here. But there are some things to talk about with it still, and it's not unplayable for sure. And lastly, we have Polytheist for Templar. This is, as the name would describe, it's a very confused ascendancy. It's actually almost hard at times to find 4 good nodes that you can all take together that will give you something to be really excited about. It almost seems like there's a little bit of anti-synergy everywhere, but the nodes that exist are all really powerful, so it kind of works out. All right, the Whisper. And I just want to say, if you look at the other Ascendancies, everything is properly capitalized. If you go to Whisper, because you're whispering, there are no capitals, which I thought was a great little bit of flavor. I don't think that's a typo. I think that was very deliberate on their part. I see what you did there, GGG, and I approve. So let's get started. Have You Forgotten is kind of a generically awesome Ascendancy notable that I don't think we've ever had anything like this. You get attack projectiles that fork, and they fork an extra time. So I believe that's like built in the effect of Awakened Fork, not necessarily the damage bonus, but still, that's a lot of clear potential, like from the get-go, assuming you choose the right skill. Off the top of my head, Lightning Arrow is probably going to be downright silly with this, just the way each hit creates an explosion. So you're going to have 1 hit explosion, 2 hits explosions, 4 hits explosions. That's going to clear just as well as if you had Pierce. So, big hype for that. You don't have to invest into multiple projectiles either, but you can do it anyway, and each one of those projectiles will have that same fork potential, so it's very, very good power scaling there, just innately. Your Mind is Destroyed is kind of a classic spell damage applies to attacks at a boosted value. Considering you're a Ranger, getting this stat in a very large amount is probably only achievable through Cluster Jewels, which is kind of an old strategy through Battle Mage's Cry. So that will work. It might even be the most powerful node here. I'm not sure what the actual scaling and stuff on that is going to be, but you're going to have the potential to get a ton of increased damage to like absurd amounts with this. But it is something that will require investment. I would say this isn't a node you want to take early. Not a word is basic blind scaling. Blind on hit, increased effect. Blind makes it easier to hit enemies. It makes it harder for them to hit you if you have evasion, right? It makes your evasion better effectively. It has some other effects. The stealth is really interesting though, because, stealth kind of has like some niche strategies for Delve, like running around in the darkness. So you might be able to make a darkness runner, like in the old days on this, which is pretty cool. It will also make it so that enemies will take longer to start attacking you, so this is good mapping survivability as well. There Is More is the distant cousin of the, Hierophant notable that gives you +4 minimum power and endurance charges. This is Frenzy and Power, so a lot of inherent damage. These nodes are always very good if you don't really want to have to worry about Frenzy and Power charges, but you do have to consider when you take a node like this that you are removing the fact that, or rather, you are taking a node here and kind of taking away almost a little bit of endgame potential in the sense that if you find a way to get power and frenzy charges, this doesn't do anything for you, right? So this is something, it's kind of the opposite of Your Mind is Destroyed, where this is amazing early and falls off later. But it is effectively 200% increased crit, 16% more damage, and then 16% more attack and cast speed, which that's not a joke, especially early on, right? Like I said, that's this might be take it first if you're playing this Ascendancy. It's very strong. All right. I'm going to move to now the only cluster of notable. Okay. So up until this point, we've been focusing on these individual notables, and there's 6 of them. There's 6 that are just 2-pointers that float, and you can mix and match as you like. Before we get to these last 2, I want to talk about the trio here because this is where they become important. And we start with an Infinite Pursuit, which basically switches your maximum mana scaling via stats, rather attributes, to Dexterity. This is inherently very good because mana is a versatile stat. You can use it to scale survivability. You have to fix your mana on every character, especially ranged characters, so this kind of works with that. Right, Mana Forged Arrows comes to mind. And on top of that, Dexterity gives you accuracy. So now you have one stat to invest into that solves a lot of problems all at once, and that's kind of a little better than it looks, but what it gives you access to is what's really exciting. Believe it or not, the less exciting of the two is a 100% Mind Over Matter effect for physical damage only. This is a great defensive layer. Physical damage is usually your Achilles heel on a ranger, so this is massively potent for just like boosting that kind of survivability. This is probably the highest possible physical mitigation you can get, but the node that really matters on this tree right now, at least in my opinion, is We Know All. On the surface, We Know All is probably not the most exciting looking node. Increasing mana cost of skills looks like a downside, but Mana Forged Arrows exists, and this basically gives you more damage on triggered bow attacks based on the amount of mana it costs. So this ups the damage of that. And you're already going to want to be scaling your mana, because again, we have attacks have added lightning damage equal to 4% of maximum mana. That looks insignificant. You're wrong again. This is Mind of the Council. This will give you another 6% for a total of 10%. And you kind of want this unique, because losing 3% of mana when you use an attack skill actually isn't really a downside here. It doesn't work with Mana Forged Arrow for triggering, but it has another benefit to it that we should probably talk about in a moment, and we will. What's really great about it though, 20 to 30% increased maximum mana, and even a Mind Over Matter effect for your incoming lightning damage. So this helmet does a lot. It's got pretty good base stats, and it's something that's, I feel has been slept on, but at the same time, 6% was really never quite enough. With all the support coming in the Whisperer tree, this is looking like a really good helmet now. And you can't say all that without thinking about Cloak of Defiance. Cloak of Defiance is another decent, evasion energy shield base that gives you a ton of mana, some mana regen, and Mind Over Matter outright. The Mind Over Matter outright is kind of why Don't Panic Yet maybe isn't the best choice. Certainly, if you choose to run Cloak of Defiance, this is not going to be something you take because you're going to be getting a much better effect. And this just isn't doing as much then, right? You're already getting 50%. Why would you go for more? You don't need it. You can get better things. And there are better things because we still have these two floating notables. And with We Know All and what is this? An Infinite Pursuit, these become very strong. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything here is pretty strong, but you're probably going to want Breathe Deep if you're taking those other two, especially in my opinion, if you're running Mind of the Council, which is how I would do it. That massive bonus to mana recovery from flasks is exceptionally good when combined with the non-instant recovery applying to your life, right? This basically means you want to get away from like an enduring mana flask that has constant uptime. You want to get away from that. You want to boost the hell of your mana flask, and you want to keep your mana from filling up all the way. So you're gonna kind of it's gonna be kind of a balancing act, but if you get it right, suddenly you have insane recovery, insanely resilient mana uptime, and you can very, very easily make it so that you are getting enough charges back, especially with how this Ascendancy is gonna like make you want to set up your passive skill tree, where it'll just be up all the time. And then lastly, we have Wait a Little, which is again kind of synergizing with Mana Forged Arrows in the sense that you want to be spending as much mana as possible. Now you're gonna get Rage. What does Rage do? Rage gives you more attack damage, and it opens up Berserk as an option. Berserk gives you a bonus to your Rage effect. So if you have 30 Rage, giving you 30% more damage, and 59% increased effect, now it's like 46, 47, 48% more damage while it's active. That's a lot of damage, and when you're not using it and you're at max rage, which will be easy, it's still 30% more damage, which is how you should read this, because normally you cannot get rage on a ranged character like normally. It's usually quite difficult to do. Usually you have to invest in War Cries, which is already kind of out of the way. I'm trying to get through this quickly. I hope it's not hard to follow. Onto the Herald. This is the one that has got me in a twist, I'll be honest. The entirety of this tree, in a very, I would call it Path of Exile 2 design, is funneled through a single node, kind of like Blood Magic. You have to get Coming Calamity, which harkens back to the unique item Coming Calamity, which is, of course, Herald-centric. But what it does is very strong, unlike Blood Magic, which almost is kind of a downer early on when you're playing Path of Exile 2. It disables your aura skills, but it gives you 200% increased mana reservation efficiency of your Herald skills. That means it is cutting the cost down to a third. That's good. That's really good. You don't need auras when you have this, to be perfectly honest, especially when we get into what the later bonuses are going to give you. But this is huge because there are some heralds early on, I'm thinking of Herald of Purity specifically, that with support gems kind of plays the game for you almost. And that's what's personally got me beaten up, is Herald of Purity. But the second node is again mandatory. You have to pick one that gives you kind of a specialty into a specific herald. Personally, I consider the bottom three here, Future Fear, which, hold on, Future Fear is kind of covered up. It's Herald of Ice buff effect and then max cold res. It's the same as the other two here, but for cold instead of fire and thunder, or lightning rather. The problem with these three is it's one resistance getting all of that max res, and I don't think it's enough to make Molding of the Flesh like particularly good. There's actually a better Ascendancy for that will be coming later. And the buffs from these heralds traditionally are, I would say, a little less exciting than what the other ones can do. Herald of Ash maybe gets a little bit of credit, and it's not an insignificant amount of damage for like Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder, but usually if you're focusing on those two heralds, it has more about being an auto bomber, you know? It's just not how I imagine it. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm underestimating the value, but it's a nice buff. Is it as good as the other two? No, because Future Guilt gives you 15% additional physical damage reduction, which is nearly 4 endurance charges, which has great synergy elsewhere in the tree. We'll get to that in a moment, as per usual. And then Future Nostalgia is 75% chaos resistance, which is absurdly good. It just is. It actually has the same synergy as the other one. These two kind of harken to another point on the tree that really benefits you for having chaos res. Additionally, the buff effect is a better scaling buff effect overall. Specifically, Herald of Agony boosts your poison, and Herald of Purity actually just gives you more physical damage, which is really, I mean, that's really good, right? You don't need to think too hard about that one. And they also both summon minions, so that's kind of another spot where other nodes in the tree seem to hit a little better, and they even have a node for both of them, so you could be running them together, that is also very, very good. Retribution, personally the least exciting node, but that by no means makes it bad, right? That's personally for me. Elemental Conflux basically gives you a 100% chance to chill, shock, and ignite. And as long as you're killing enemies, you're doing that. So this is incredibly good for auto bombers who need to have that constant shocking from Herald of Ice and then like freezing from Herald of Thunder, or however that works. If you're not sure how auto bomber works, like Herald auto bomber, you should look it up. I'm not going to steal someone's video to stick in here and show it. I've never done it myself, but basically you run around the map, you get the buffs going, and once you do that, it just, everything around you dies. It's incredibly fast. These are going to be the fastest clearers, period. It's almost shocking to me that this can exist. Like, these guys are going to smoke maps in ways that the rest of us are going to be a little jealous of. And honestly, I don't even think it's going to be that hard to get up and running. This, if you know how to do this, like set up a Herald Auto Bomber, this is probably the best starter build, because you're going to make a ton of currency really fast. After that, we have what is, in my opinion, maybe one of the best Ascendancy notables that have ever been made. I've said that a lot now, I feel like. But what it does is absurd. And, you know, usually they have to get that moniker. The reason why I like this one so much with Future Guilt and Future Nostalgia specifically is for the top line of text, you need Chaos Res. And for the bottom line of text, you're giving up endurance charges. Future Guilt covers a lot of what endurance charges would do. So does the top line of text with the elemental damage reduction. Future Nostalgia gives you the Chaos Res. So you can fix this to kind of negate the downside. And in return, just let's say you have 75% Chaos Res, which you want, right? That is its own benefit, is to have more incentive to go get that, right? That's, I believe that's 37.5 elemental damage reduction. If you're unsure of what that means exactly, when you have 75% resistance, every additional 5 max res is another 20% reduced damage from there. So this is almost worth 10 max res. That's real good, fellas. I don't... Wow. And you have to consider as well, that you can have max res on top of this. If you somehow got to 90 all maximum elemental resistances and then had this, I mean, that would break the game. That effectively be 95% elemental damage reduction. You'd survive everything, pretty much. Potentially one of the tankiest characters ever. I think this is a great node, especially with what you have to go through to get here. But at this point, you have allocated 3 if you take it, which means you probably can't get to Apocalypse, which is a shame. Something to be considered for sure, but to be fair, you don't need Damnation either. As good as the defensive buffs here are, if you want the other stuff, you can. But also, Apocalypse is gem levels, and you can get gem levels elsewhere. So this is one that you could also grow out of. Food for thought. Outside of that, we then have Scourge and Persecution. And these come off of the second node. You pick one or the other. 100% Persecution is for Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice. This is the auto bomber's dream. You want to be able to crit. The base crit for these skills is low. I think it might even be 0. I'm not going to look it up. I just know that it's low, and flat crit is very valuable because usually they run the increased critical strike support to give it more flat crit. And then the area of effect is also incredibly useful. Like, this is lightning in a bottle that's been in your freezer for a while. What excites me though is Scourge. And this is the node that has me in a twist. +2 to maximum number of Sentinels of Purity has me thinking, why am I making a Dominating Blow character when I can make a Herald of Purity character that kind of works the same and might even be a lot stronger? Because I don't necessarily need this. I want it. But I mean, Damnation, Future Guild, Coming Calamity, kind of making all the synergies work, Scourge. That is such a tremendous amount of support pushing towards damage on a skill that usually doesn't have this much support. I mean, just to give you an idea, this is 50% more damage on Herald of Purity that does not exist anywhere else in the game. I think. Pretty sure you don't have anything that gives you additional Sentinels of Purity. Not since a very old Guardian rework. On the same point, Virulence is the stat for Herald of Agony, so again, this is very good with that. And because this is physical scaling and Herald of Agony is poison scaling, you can actually run both of these together, even though you have to pick one or the other, right? At this point, you can run both Heralds and have both minions firing on all cylinders. And that's really good, you know? That's one of those things that's really, really good. I believe, what is it? Herald of Purity plus Holy Relic was kind of a thing in the past. That probably comes back. If you can find a way to poison, because of the reservation efficiency, you might be able to get all of that going at the same time. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, what is it? The Coming Calamity is still in the game. It is going to set a hard reservation point though, so running 2 isn't the best with this, but it does give 2 levels, so if you're only focusing on 1, this might still be worth it. It's also worth bearing mention that the circle rings exist. These are from the synthesis bosses, which they just kind of drop in the end game now. If you're not familiar with Path of Exile 1, you'll get a random drop from a high enough level boss and you'll go fight them. And for instance, this one here, Circle of Guilt, there's one for every Herald. This is the Herald of Purity one. There are some very, very nice buffs you can pick up. In this case, you get 2 random Herald of Purity modifiers on the ring. It also gives you some flat physical damage. This doesn't say anything specific, so it applies to both attacks and spells. It also gives you armor, it gives you attributes, and it gives you synthesized modifiers, which is where these can get kind of absurd. And there's even an Uber version that can roll from all the pools. It's an even slightly better version. Assuming it's hitting things you want, you could get potentially a very good one of these, right? If you're running Herald of Purity and Herald of Agony, you could get a ton of Chaos Res. This would be incredibly valuable. You could get bonuses to your Herald of Purity Sentinel damage. You could get Max Res if you're running the other Elemental Herald. So the potential for these rings is very high. You could have 2 of them too. That's the other thing. If the bonuses here are attractive enough, you can really make something happen in your build by using these rings. So don't forget about these. Again, physical damage reduction, Herald of Purity, an entire endurance charge's worth, which synergizes extremely well with Future Guild. Overall, I think Herald is going to get played a lot, and not just for auto bombers, because Agony and Purity are very powerful minion skills, and adding things that support their scaling that don't exist elsewhere in the game is basically just like a tremendous buff to them. These are going to be much stronger than they normally are, I think. I know Virulence exists elsewhere in the game, but maybe not on, well, not on this side of the tree, right? That's another thing. Usually when you're playing Herald of Agony, you're not necessarily playing it on a witch, although you could, right? You could play it as an occultist, but this, I feel like this is probably going to be stronger. And yeah, it's just good ascendancy. This is the Paladin Ascendancy for Duelist. It is brought to you by the person at GGG who is still trying to make links work. They are working so damn hard to get that going. Absolution, what is it? It pulls curses off of your link target, and it makes your auras stronger while you have a link target. I like that it says while you have a link target. That's a lot better in my opinion than if it were just like to your link target. That makes this a bit more attractive. If you like link skills, you probably love this. But I always find it silly that like it's +5, right? +5. Why is the number so much higher here than elsewhere in the game? You know, who is working so hard to force this? These two nodes right here take up a lot of real estate, and I don't like them very much, if I'm being entirely honest. That said, field medicine is very good. Even though like part of it is having to do with link targets again. Magic Utility Flask just having 40% increased effect is tremendous. Oh my god. I mean, just like as in the most bare bone example, you could have a Quicksilver Flask, and now that 30% is, what is it, 42%. And that's not including any other increased effect modifiers. So there's a lot of stats you gain from this, especially in a mapping situation. In bossing situations, you might not have the same uptime that you would hope for, but this at least is just kind of a generically good node. You could throw this in on any Ascendancy that you build here and just have a little bit of an extra buff. We have a choice node down at the south, Discipline, Determination, or Grace at level 30, which is, it's pretty cool. Generally speaking, if you're doing Grace or Determination, which I have here, I believe Determination is about 600%, or 600%, oh my god, I wish. Is another 600 flat armor and another 5% more armor. Okay, pretty good. It saves you like a socket. Personally, I don't think this is the best. I think you're better off going with Grace, because Grace is 1,000 evasion. Again, the same 5% more. That's a little better in my opinion, but you do kind of lose out on the Val option, right? You'd still have to waste the socket on it, so that's again not the best. But if you don't need the Val version, this is just a lot. It's really good. I would love this node a lot more if it did something for the reservation efficiency of that skill, or made it free. That's probably too much to ask, but still, the big thing that kind of irks me here is this node does not do that much. If you want these things, you're already going to run them, and they're just a little bit stronger. Discipline, likewise, is another 100 flat energy shield, which I can't knock that very much. I mean, that's good, right? 100 energy shield is 100 energy shield. And if you have enough aura effect because you're playing a support character, this is obviously a lot better, right? Again, this is support oriented. You can take this if you're trying to build a solo character as Paladin, but it's probably not going to be the best. Finally, we have Bring the Battle, which I think this is lifted directly from, well, it's not lifted directly from Champion. It's like a hybrid from Champion and Chieftain, where Warcries have infinite power, which is a very powerful line of text, don't get me wrong, and then takes 20% increased damage. It's all right. You know, you're going to have a lot of increased damage taken from the duelist area of the tree, so it's not that great. The taunt is pretty interesting for the less damage, because again, that synergizes with the whole playing a support character thing. This is very powerful in that regard, especially because your Warcries will also buff allies. So taking your link nodes and then a super aura and stacking aura effect and whatnot, you probably make a really incredibly potent character for team play, which is kind of the hampering of Paladin. Is it's very team oriented. Outside of that, you have Lighter Divinity. This is still team oriented, but again, it's a take increased percent damage modifier. If this was more at a lower value, I think this would be a lot more exciting, because again, this is additive with shock, with, I don't know, with this. These don't multiply together, which makes the values, I wish maybe if it was just a little higher as well, like 30% maybe. 30% here, 25% here. It just doesn't seem quite that good, because I mean, this is the whole node. The whole node is that they take increased elemental damage. It almost feels like something is missing. After that, we have lifted straight from Guardian, the Elemental Valiance node. This is Summon Elemental Relic. Summon Elemental Relic it's good. You can do some very cool things with it. It gives you anger, hatred, and wrath, so more support. It triggers off of allies doing stuff, which I believe includes party members, so You can get these all going, and I believe they're actually slightly better. Yeah, they're like level 27. Your aura effect won't affect these, but you do kind of get them for free, which is, I mean, sure, right? But again, this is very support oriented. It's all support oriented all the time. There is some neat stuff you can do with this though. They outlined this cool interaction with Tukohama's Fortress and Necromantic Aegis, which basically gives your minions blood magic. So they'll show up, they will immediately reserve half of their life, which can then trigger minion instability, causing them to die and explode instantly. And they'll do 100% of their maximum life and 33% of their maximum life additionally as fire damage, and they'll just blow up. So if you can scale their life, there might be something there. I don't know if that's going to synergize particularly well with the rest of the tree. But lastly, we have Anointed Champion, pulled right from Inquisitor. Yeah, pulled right from Inquisitor. It gives you Consecrated Ground while you're stationary, and it lingers. I actually hate this node because you get so much more Consecrated Ground support on Inquisitor, and this doesn't have that, and it feels very lackluster to me. It is good for team play though, because Consecrated Ground, I mean, it's 5% life regen. I believe it's reduced effect of curses on you while you're on it as well. So this isn't bad. None of this is bad. But again, this is team play. So that it is what it is, you know? It is what it is. Polytheist. I feel like Azaro's gonna show up in my room and be like, the weary traveler draws close to the end of the path. This is exhausting. There is so much to cover here. How is this not its own league, man? How many are left after this? Less. I think we're over the halfway point. That's nice. Okay. Before I said this Ascendancy is very confused, and I think that holds up very well. There's a lot to go over. It kind of works as 3 clusters. You have the Brine King cluster with Rizlatha and Gruthkul. You have the Lunaris cluster with Ralakesh and Yugol. And you have the Solaris cluster with Abereth and Garakan. This one kind of sucks. That's mean. I don't like this one very much personally. I think it's a little memey, but we'll get to that when we. You know what? Let's start with it. Let's start with why it's not good. So Devout of Abereth gives you level 20 Abereth's Fury. This is lifted right off the unique boots for Abereth's hooves. Abereth is a giant goat demon who sucks. No, he's fine, but this gives you level 7 Abereth's Fury. You're getting the level 20 version to kind of make up for the lack of support gems that go into the sockets on the boots. I would say one of the higher advantages of this whole setup is you can get boots with much higher movement speed, and Abereth's Fury works in a way where the more steps you take, the more damage you do. And this, in a funny way, synergizes with Devout of Garakan, which wants you to be moving. As a reward for moving, you are generically immune to elemental ground effects, which that's actually quite good generically. And I would say regen while moving is also quite good generically, because that's usually when you want it, right? When you're repositioning, you want your mana and your life to be going up a little more quickly if possible. Evasion rating while moving is, I mean, that's fine, right? Again, you're dodging, you're trying to avoid stuff, but when you stop to attack, you don't want a bunch of your evasion rating to go away. That's kind of meh. I almost feel like, why isn't this more? Like a more modifier, maybe at a lesser value? It just doesn't seem that great. Also, you're a Templar, so you're not going to have the most evasion rating. Devout of Solaris is actually quite good, the problem being that you have to go through one of these two to get it. I think Abereth is the most usable of the two. Nearby enemies are blinded. Great. Again, kind of weird because you need evasion to really benefit from that. But otherwise, the crit help is great, and it stacks onto that with more crit chance, and it reduces enemies' chance to crit you, and that's a great defensive layer. I can get behind this. The problem is I have to go through one of these two to get it. So, I don't know, you know, Abereth's Fury scaling off of footsteps, being able to have better boots, higher level version of the skill, maybe that's good enough to actually build around, in which case Devout of Solaris is incredible. But this has to be really good, or it has to have a ton of potential, and I don't know how you do that without support gems. I guess the damage value just has to be high enough, which it could be, you know? It absolutely could be. And before anyone gets excited, no, this does not work with Cyclone. You're not taking steps with Cyclone. If it did work, this would be way cooler. Everyone would use it. Everyone would use those boots. But it doesn't. So this is kind of the black sheep of the tree, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't, because Devout of Solaris is actually, I think it's actually quite a good node. And there's almost enough incentive here for you to try to figure out a way to make evasion work on a Templar. Significantly more exciting, we have the Brine King area of the tree. The Rizlatha node is just pure value, as long as you're doing attacks. This really, really hits well with, I believe it's 30% more attack damage, or maximum attack damage rather, is essentially 15% more at all times. This doesn't mention physical, but I believe it still works with bleed the way other maximum attack modifiers work, because it is affecting the actual, like the actual attack hit, not specifically the overall damage in the same way. It's affecting the range, which should apply before the calculations split off. Bleed is complicated, or ailments rather are complicated. Outside of that, the reduced regeneration rate is fantastic. This blocks Maven healing. It blocks enemies that heal in general. This breaks a ton of problem exiles in Hall of Grandmasters. It's overall incredible quality of life. I believe this used to be on, or it might still be on, the Occultist notable. And that anytime you play Occultist, this feels so good. So that's just good. Devout of the Brine King is a little more interesting. Cannot be frozen. Feels a little silly. I mean, it's good, right? Cannot be frozen is a great notable. Plus 10% maximum cold res is where this really shines, though. There's no way around it. This is meant to be used with melding of the flesh. This makes it so that you lose all max res, but your maximum elemental resistance is based on the highest. So there's a very concrete way in the game already to specifically spread this buff to your other max reses and get a ton. So getting all max res to 90 with investment and the right equipment is very possible on this tree, and that's probably going to be the highlight point of the Brine King section. Devout of Gruthkull is awesome. It's unfortunately also a giant meme for the same reason that Gruthkull's pelt is. In fact, let's go ahead and bring this up. Same downside. Actually even slightly better benefit, I think, than what's on the tree. 100% global physical damage, 300 life, 10% regen, and then over here, another 300 life, 8% regen. I want to say 600 life and 18% life regenerated per second is good enough for spell skills being disabled and having no chest slot. But it's probably not. No matter how much they stack, it might be. It actually might be. I could be wrong about that one. 18% is a lot, dude. But the problem is auras are spells, heralds are spells, aspects are spells, banners are spells, blood rage is a spell. So many things are spells. There's no way around that. You can't overcome it. The only real exception, other than attacks, which are not spells, are war cries, which are war cries. And they don't want those to be spells because they don't want people to trigger them. So if you can build a character that is entirely based around war cries and attacks, and you want this as your chess piece, this is the greatest node in the world for you. Outside of that, I don't see it. But to be fair, one of the best places for Gruthkull's pelt would be on a bleed build, and Devout of Rislatha works with that. Devout of the Brine King even kind of works with that, because Melding of the Flesh is a jewel. But generally with Melding of the Flesh, you would want to have Purity of Ice with this, and other ways to help fix your elemental resistances. So you have a huge uphill battle overcoming the minus 70 to 80% all elemental resistances. There is a little bit of help there. We're going over to what I consider to be the best part of the tree. We'll start with kind of the weakest node, Devout of Yugal. Hex Reflection. This just reflects hexes. Honestly, not that good. It doesn't, like, reduce the effect of the hex on you. You still take the whole hex as well. But affecting hexproof enemies is rather good. That is generically applicable to a lot of situations. There's a lot of enemies in the game, like rare enemies, that can just end up being hexproof and become much, much harder for you to kill. Usually the ultra tanky rare monsters that people can't seem to get through are also immune to hexes somehow, or hexproof rather. And then immune to reflected damage is incredible quality of life, which is kind of a theme on the tree, where you can find 3 really good Ascendancy notables, and then you pick up one that just has good quality of life. The exception is if you do Brine King, you can take Ralakesh. And Ralakesh is good for everyone. Ralakesh is very good for everyone. +3 to all minimum. And you know what? You can make this +6 minimum endurance charges, which is really good. You know what else? You can get to +6 minimum endurance charges. It's actually not that hard. You just need 3 Grand Spectrums, and one of them has to be the minimum endurance charge one. So you get all those endurance charge nodes on the tree. Very doable for a Templar. Honestly, this kind of like invalidates the need for Devout of the Brine King and Melding of the Flesh. To be fair though, if you could somehow get both working, you would be immortal. Yeah, you would be immortal. I don't know how anything would kill you. You'd literally just not take any elemental damage. you're right back to Herald with Damnation and max resistances if you manage to pull that off. It's very good, right? That's hold on. Right, it's 4% damage reduction basically against everything but chaos per charge. So 24%. That's kind of crazy, right? 24% reduced elemental damage and physical damage taken on top of, say, Rizlatha, Gruthkul, having Gruthkul's pelt. You can make a very tanky character that maybe doesn't need auras and the like. And you still have War Cries, which is a source of damage that didn't exist before. There's kind of something there. And if you're not doing something like that, you have Devout of Lunaris. Devout of Lunaris is right up there in that category of, how does this exist, in my opinion at least. The fact that you have to go through Devout of Ralakesh to get it, or you'll probably go through it, is just like cherry on top. Oh no, I have to spend points to get to this. But you're spending points on this. Like, come on, man. Spells fire 2 additional projectiles. Nova spells cast at the targeted location instead of around you. So this is Astral Projector, right into your Ascendancy. But honestly, it's the 2 additional spell projectiles that make this exciting. Usually when you want additional projectiles on a spellcaster, you either have to do weird things by starting a ranger, who is much farther from spellcasting, or you have to use the support gem, which is going to reduce the actual damage of the spells. None of the downsides, all of the upsides. So there's inherently a lot of really good places to make use of this. Just like Winter Orb, Spark, any sort of inherently shotgunning skill when you're dealing with packs like Fireball, Blazing Salvo. There's some cheeky things you can do with Creeping Frost on Unearth and ground targeting that can give you shotgun effects. It's just a very, very nice, notable for a whole lot of reasons. Generally speaking, if you're taking Devout of Lunaris and Devout of Ralakesh, you can make something happen. The problem is, once you take these 2 notables, what do you do with the rest of your stuff? Devout of Yugel's okay, right? But it feels like there's not much character power. Obviously, you can't take Devout of Gruthkul because it disables your spells. Devout of Rizlatha is fine, right? The reduced regeneration rate is okay. If you do some sort of hybrid damage build, maybe you can get away with it. The Brine King follow-up is good. Cannot be frozen is nice. And again, melding of the flesh strategies come into play. Devout of Garakan does some okay stuff. But generally speaking, I'm not sure what you're supposed to add when you're doing a spellcaster, even though they set up for it here. And that's overall why I think Polytheist is kind of confused. It almost feels like the 4 most synergizing nodes are actually these 4 right here, which, if you can make Devout of Gruthkul work, it's probably going to be very good. Outside of that, I'm really just not entirely sure what to do with this one. I think this is going to be the most fun one to figure out. I'm sure there's some combinations here, and also to be fair, we don't know how good level 20 Abra's Fury is. That's it. Oh my god, I'm exhausted. This is kind of hard when it was 3. 4 out of nowhere right after 3 has like absolutely devastated me. That said, I am growing increasingly excited for the league. I'm calling it a league already. For the event, the Bizarro event, the Legacy of Freesia event. Whisperer looks awesome. Herald looks awesome. Paladin, I mean, if you like support, I'm pretty sure Paladin is one of the greatest things you've ever seen. Polytheist is confused. I don't think it's bad. Right? Playable, probably. But it's so hard for me to find 4 nodes that I get excited about. I'm not really sure how to describe how Polytheist makes me feel. Because it's just like, how do you get 4 nodes that all work together well? And there is the Gruthkul situation, but outside of that, it's just not that easy. Anyway, that's all. I'm exhausted. I was not expecting to have to make a video today. I was ready for a break. I thought I'd be getting a break. But I hope you have a good one, Exiles. Again, I will be back right away to dive into these new Ascendancies if they drop more. Hopefully not tomorrow, but at the speed they're going, I feel like it might be. Have a good one.